I'm continuing this sermon series today on the long view, and we're going to read again. This is the first time I've ever done a sermon series and only used two texts. The first two Sundays we read from Matthew about the wise men, and then the last two Sundays we're reading from this wonderful text, but somewhat enigmatic, if you will, from Mark the 8th chapter, where Jesus talks about finding your life and losing your life. So beginning with verse 31. Then Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Then he called the crowd with his disciples, and he said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life?" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, this is really a milestone moment in the life of Christ United Methodist Church. I have been here in my 31st year, so I've seen a number of milestone moments. I remember almost 30 years ago when we moved into the final sanctuary, the third phase sanctuary on Glencliff, and then, of course, the moment when we relocated the church, the buildings of the sanctuaries over here. Lots of important moments, but I consider this one to be about as important as any, because today we are being joined by two other campuses. The campus in Princeton, probably someplace between 100 and 200 people over there this morning. It was amazing. Yesterday they gathered here, probably about 50 volunteers, and they were unpacking all of the things that they will use over there at Clark Junior High School, and all the things that will be used to set up worship over there. And so we've got this camera back here. I want you to stop and think about, because the impact service is joining us as well. We've asked the people in Trinity Hall at 11 o'clock. They will be helping us experiment and critiquing this particular video production, helping us get better at that. So we welcome probably a couple of hundred people from the impact service in Trinity Hall, and then I think probably over 100 people in Princeton, all of them volunteers. It's a rehearsal service. It's not really open to the public yet, but we're preparing to open to the public in a few months. So when I look at this camera back here, I'm really looking at these wonderful up to 300 people that are joining us by video format today. And I'd really like it if you just stop and think about what it would be like to have another 300 people sitting amongst you today, because that really is what we're doing in the life of our church today, is that we're moving out. I'm going to preach a sermon about this sometime in the future, about what it is we are called to do as a church and why it is so vitally important, not only to those that we will reach in Princeton and that we reach in the contemporary service and impact, but why it's vitally important to you and me as we sit here and worship together, that we reach out to the world and embrace others. So a really important moment, and we thank all of those who are helping to make Princeton work for us today. I want to stop and review what we've done so far. I mentioned last week that there are some sermons that are more knitted together more tightly than others. And this one, as much as any sermon series that I've ever done, is really connected. It's called The Long View, and in many ways it's really one sermon with 4 parts that we've been preaching through 4 Sundays. So I want to review this, and we're able to do this pretty quickly because we have this video format for us. The first Sunday we talked about the wise men and how after meeting Jesus they returned by another road. And so the title of that particular sermon was Turn the Page. And we talked about how before we can take the long view in terms of the future, we need to be able to kind of put the past in its place. Not that the past is not always important to us, it is. But we need to be able to turn the page and forget the things that have taken place in the past that bog us down, that bother us. So we had this quote, just as a reminder. If you've not seen these other sermons, you can go to the website or to iTunes and you can get either audio cast or video cast on this. Nelson Mandela, I made the comment in that sermon, and I think the great power of Nelson Mandela came to him not because he was a great attorney, a bright man, because he was so committed, but it was when he left prison after 26 years. And he made that decision to hold no grudges, to not be resentful, to not seek vengeance against those who had kept him in prison, and it had been a brutal 26 years. And this quote that I think is worth keeping, he once said, "Resentment is the poison we swallow, thinking it will kill someone else." So if you're going to take a long view in life, the first thing you need to be able to do is to turn the page, and while you remember your history, you stay focused on the long view. And that's what we got to when we went to the second sermon, which was called Navigate by the Stars. And again, we talked about the wise men and how they didn't navigate from one village to the other, but they had a big goal. They navigated by the star of Bethlehem. So by definition, they had the long view. And in that particular sermon, we talked about what life looks like when you look at it in a really confined way, a condensed version, and when you look at the long view. And we use these stock market charts. And again, not to make a comparison between a stock market chart and a person's life, but this is the Dow Jones Industrial Average between 1900 and 1920. Some of you, this is the third time you've seen this, so hang in there. And you see it's up and down, and the trajectory is somewhat upward, but not very much. You see lots of peaks and valleys. And we know that's the way life is, isn't it? Over the short term, lots of peaks and valleys. But when you take the long view, from 1900 to the present day, what you see are lots of peaks and valleys, but the trajectory is upward and onward. That's what we'd like for life to be. And so the point of that sermon is, if we have a long-term goal, a vision, a guiding principle given to us by God, then it helps us to navigate through those valley times and the peaks as well. We don't get seduced by them, so that we stay on track for a good and meaningful and purposeful life. And then last week, we talked about the fact that the title of the sermon was, "It Isn't About You." And we talked about the fact that if you're going to lead a meaningful life, it really can't be about you. It has to be about others. And we use this text here. Jesus says, if you're going to find your life, you must lose it. And I think that's part of what Jesus was saying. You have to recognize that it isn't about you. You lose your life in service to others. And we talked about some research, some scientific research on what makes for a meaningful or a happy, if you will, or a satisfying life. And we'll go to this next slide. We talked about 4 things, and this is research-based. If you want to live a satisfying life, you focus your time and your energy on faith, loving God, family, community, and work. And we talked about how these are the 4 things that Jesus talks about and the 4 things that Jesus models for us as we read through the New Testament. And so this morning we want to go to this, just take this final step, and I've called the sermon To Princeton and Beyond, because this is the day we're opening up and embracing Princeton and the Impact Service. But in lots of ways, that title, To Princeton and Beyond, is really a proxy for saying, if you want to live the ultimate, meaningful, and satisfying life, you have to lose yourself in something that is greater than you. You lose yourself in a cause that is greater than you. A lot of you have already discovered this. I have a good friend who is a member of this church, and I've been with her on a number of occasions, private occasions, semi-private occasions, very public occasions. And she always introduces herself in this way. She tells what her name is, and she says, "My passion, my commitment is on behalf of children." And she'll tell about an incident that took place a number of years ago when she was at a place where a child was abducted. And she talks about how that particular moment, she was in a park here in Plano. Many of you remember the incident. And she'll talk about how That particular moment literally changed her life. That as she thought about it, she realized it could have been her child, or it could have been a friend's child, but it really didn't make any difference. It was a child who was abducted and whose life was lost forever. And from that moment on, she has made a commitment in her life. This is her passion, protecting young children. I have another friend whose daughter has diabetes, and he's made a commitment in his life to serve with the Diabetes Foundation to find a cure for diabetes. I have another friend who has built a facility in South America to serve teenage boys because of a family situation that he's been through. We discover all the time that when people's lives are significantly changed, the commitment they make is to lose themselves in a cause, or in multiple causes, if you will, that are greater than they. I know dozens, probably hundreds of people that if you'd stop and ask them to tell about themselves, they would say, well, my church really revolves. My life really revolves around the service that I give to my church. In so many different ways, all the different opportunities to serve up here at Christ Church and in other churches. And this morning, let's just acknowledge what's taking place in Princeton. About 100 volunteers over there in Princeton today, and they're not really there because I asked them to volunteer and do a job over there. They're not really there because Clay Horton said, I really need you to come over there. He told them what the opportunities were. They're over there because they desire and need to lose themselves in a cause that is greater than they. And so let me tell you, there are two men who took their pickup trucks and pulled two 24-foot trailers over to Princeton this morning. Not a really big deal, just a small thing done with great love. And about right now, there are 50 or 60 volunteers that are unloading those trucks. And it's amazing to see this. And they're taking in the audio equipment and the hospitality signs and the coffee servers, and setting up the places where the children will meet, and setting up the place where the youth will meet, and setting up the chairs. None of them are doing great things. They're all doing small things with great love, as we all so often like to Mother Teresa's great phrase around here. They're doing small things with great love, and they are doing so because this is an important part of their spiritual journey. They have learned that not only is life not about them, it's about others, but they've learned about the opportunity to lose themselves in service to other human beings. I think that's what Jesus was talking about in this text. He says, those who will find their life must lose it. Those who lose their life will find it. He's talking about the importance of committing ourselves to a cause that is greater than we, and that when we lose ourselves to such a cause, it literally is life transforming. I want to say just a word about Richard Sherman. Some of you, I was watching the game a week ago when the Seattle Seahawks won that game, and Richard Sherman, the cornerback, I was watching at the time when he had this little rant. I suppose a lot of you have seen this. Ordinarily, I wouldn't say anything about this because it's been commented on so much. It's on YouTube and everything else. But I want to say something about it this morning because there's a piece of this, of the critique of this, that I think has been missing. And let me say that I've read editorials about Richard Sherman. You know, he's a graduate of Stanford. They say he's a very bright guy and a very thoughtful guy, and that what we saw on TV last week isn't all of who he is. And so we want to give him credit there. But as I saw his rant, and it was literally over the top, it was very, very emotional. What bothered me was not the fact that it was so emotional or so over the top, but that it was about him rather than about his team. I mean, I've wondered a lot about what Pete Carroll, his coach, thought about it. This man who has worked so hard to build a team. Let me tell you, if you've ever been a part of a great team, and I have, both a great athlete. I played on not a very big role. I played on a great football team when I was in high school. And I've been a part of great teams since then. If you've ever been a part, not athletic teams necessarily, work teams, if you've ever been a part of a great team, you know that there is no satisfaction greater than being a part of a team that accomplishes something wonderful. There's no victory more joyful than a team victory. And so my disappointment in Richard Sherman was that here in this moment when his team had won a great victory, when his team was on the way to the Super Bowl, he was talking about himself. And I thought, the person that was cheated the most in that moment weren't his fans. They weren't the fans of Seattle or the people who were rooting against Seattle. The person he cheated the most was himself, because he missed that moment of joy that comes in the victory when the team comes together and the team wins. I think Jesus understood that. In the Gospel of John, in the last part of the Gospel of John, there's a section where he talks to the disciples about what life is going to be like when he is no longer there. And when you read through this kind of pastoral advice that Jesus gives to the disciples, when you read through that, it becomes clear that what he's trying to encourage them to do is to form what the Greek Bible calls koinonia, a community of disciples that are committed to him and to one another, to lose themselves in the cause of the gospel. A number of years ago, maybe 27 or 28 years ago, I had just come to Plano to be the pastor here at Christ Church. A friend of mine, Mark Craig, and I put together a group of preachers. We were very selective about this. There were 6 of us. Mark and I from this conference, 3 pastors maybe from the Texas conference, a pastor from the Northwest Texas conference. We put together a group of pastors. We were all about the same age. We were all serving in small to mid-sized churches. And we were all committed to growing the church. And we put together this group of pastors, and we met once or twice a year. We'd go to a hotel someplace, and we would spend 2 days doing nothing but talking about church growth and strategy and trying to learn from one another. I think it's fair to say that we were all highly committed, maybe even somewhat driven, ambitious. And so I'll always remember the day that my friend Wayne Day from Houston, brilliant pastor, my same age. We were in, I guess, just our mid-30s at the time. One day Wayne said, "You know what? We need to remember something. We're all serving churches that have the ability to grow and to become significant churches. But we need to remember that it's not about us." He said, and in the moment we may think it's about us, but 25 or 50 years from now, nobody will even remember our names. And if they do, the ones who hear our names really won't care. And that was an awakening moment for me. I thought he is exactly right. He is exactly right. I'm a third generation preacher, and he's exactly right. And it changed something for me. I thought, nobody's really going to remember my name 25 or 30 or 50 years from now. So maybe it's important to leave behind something that's worthwhile, that has nothing to do with me. And that's when we started talking at Christ Church about the fact that our ministry isn't really for us. We moved over to this location and we said, this isn't about having a prettier church. It's not about having more parking places so it'll be easier for you to get a parking place. A lot of you know it's more difficult to get a parking place over here. It isn't about having a more comfortable place in the pew. This is about creating and building and sustaining a ministry that will be here for our children and our grandchildren and our grandchildren's children. Something that will last far beyond what anybody remembers about you or me. And that's what happened with my friend who is committed to protecting children. My friend who is committed to finding a cure for diabetes. It probably won't even happen in his lifetime. My friend who has created a ministry in South America. It's about something that will live on and about something that is much, much bigger than any of us as individuals. Jesus said that if you are going to find your life, you must lose it. And I would put it this way this morning. If you're going to find your life and live a life of great vitality, live a profoundly important life, you must be willing to lose your life in service to something that is much, much greater than you. I'm going to close this morning by reminding you of a great story that you've heard before, but it's worth repeating, the story of Albert Schweitzer. You may remember that Schweitzer, long before he went to Africa, was a brilliant concert organist. He was known throughout Europe as being one of the great concert organists of the time. He was also a theologian, had a doctorate, and he wrote one of the great books about Jesus, about the New Testament ever. Still one of the classic books. What a brilliant man he was. And he was teaching at a university, and he came home one afternoon. He was tired. He was kind of bored with life. He was, and he started looking through his mail, and he found a little tract that was in his mail about the Congo. It had been written by a man by the name of Alfred Bogner. It was titled "The Needs of the Congo Mission." And in it, this is what it said. Alfred Bogner wrote, he says, "As I sit here in Africa today, it is my prayer that these words will fall upon the eyes of someone that God has called and who will say, 'Here am I, Lord. Here am I.'" And Schweitzer, reading these words, was just moved. And suddenly he said to himself, "My search has ended. I am coming. My search has ended. I am coming." He enrolled in medical school, spent 8 years in medical school, and in 1913 he sailed for Lamborghini, where he spent the rest of his life. I don't know. I have no idea what the cause is in your life that is so compelling that you're willing to say, "I am coming." I don't know whether it might be just one great cause or multiple causes. I don't know what the vision is that might capture you where you would say, "This is it. I am coming." But I know that the life well lived takes place when somebody feels the call of God upon their life in such a way that they say, "My prayer has been answered. I am coming. My life has been changed. Thanks be to God." Amen.